Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we are going to be doing a more chatty one today for a change, as though I don't talk non-stop in my videos already. But today's video is not going to be a tutorial, as you can see from the title. I am going to be doing the palette tag and taking you through a few of my eyeshadow palettes. I never really think of doing tags, but this was suggested by one of my followers on Instagram, so I will link her down below. Thank you very much for suggesting this. It was a tough one, I won't lie. I did really struggle with some of these, and I was really trying to avoid repeats, but I didn't quite manage, and I'll go through all of them, but some of them do just end up coming back, and we're just gonna have to deal with it. I believe that this tag originated from Samantha March and Ali Glines, so I will be linking their videos down below, and the ones that I had seen before were by Mel Thompson and Angela Bright, so I will also be linking theirs down below. If you guys want to join in, I will have the list of questions down in the description box, so you guys can just copy and paste them in a comment, and we can have a chat about all the palettes that we love or don't love, and see if any of us agree or if you guys completely disagree with some of mine. So I've got all the palettes in front of me, and I think the best thing to do is just to jump in. So the first one is my most recent palette, and I literally waited until this had arrived to film this video because I couldn't not share it. I had to be included. This is the Colourpop and the Mandalorian The Child palette. I mean, I couldn't not get it. Look at how cute it is. I literally just filmed my review for the palette, so it is actually what I've got on right now, and it will be going up before this video, so if you guys haven't already seen it, what I will do is link any reviews down in the description box, as well as linking the palettes. I mean, what is there to say about this? I think everyone kind of went crazy for Baby Yoda. Everyone loves him, so this palette was always going to be a success. It's a khaki palette. I feel like a lot of brands are bringing out khakis, but not necessarily doing it quite right. Some of them have been a bit of a miss for me, and I haven't really wanted them. I saw this color scheme, I had to have it. It's super pretty. It's really not something that I had in my collection, so even if this palette hadn't been Baby Yoda themed, I would have still gone for it, but that is my most recent palette. Next up is my oldest palette, and I had to do a bit of thinking about this because I wasn't sure. I think I decluttered some of my older palettes like a couple of years ago, I think, at this point, and one of the ones that I had in there was one that everyone had, which was of course the Urban Decay Original Naked palette. I bought it, oh my god, almost 10 years ago. I also then realized that actually that wasn't my oldest palette, and technically my oldest palette was one from Sephora that some family members gave to me when I was first getting into makeup. I actually managed to find a photo of it online, so I will put it up on screen, but it was one of those that did everything. So eyeshadow, lipstick, bronzer, blusher, I think it even had a highlighter. I used it for years, and it was my first colourful palette, but it got to a point where it had to go because I think I got it when I was about 15. The one that I'm actually going to show you today is one that I have in my collection. I just wanted to mention that because I just, it's quite fun reminiscing. When it comes to the palettes that I still have in my collection, the oldest one that I have is the Modern Renaissance palette. I mean, everyone had this one, didn't they, at one point? I think a lot of people will have this listed as their oldest palette. This for me was the palette that kind of reignited my love for makeup, because I was really into it when I was a teenager and when beauty YouTube was kind of up and coming. I used to watch loads of it. I started buying loads of things, and then at some point I kind of just fell out of love with it, which makes me really sad to think about. But while I was at uni, I wasn't really buying as much makeup anymore. I wasn't really watching any beauty videos. I don't know if it's just because I couldn't afford it anymore while I was a student, and then I bought this, would it have been 3 years ago now, and that was kind of the end of it for my bank account. After buying this, that's when I started my blog, and then a year later, that's when I started my YouTube channel. So this is definitely the palette that for me just fully reignited my love for makeup. Maybe I should put this in a project pan and actually try and finish it up, because yeah, 3 years old, it is a bit old now, but it's one of those palettes that everyone has, and warm tones are kind of coming back now, so I feel like I could end up using this more and more, but I know that if this got discontinued, a lot of people would be really upset. Next up is my most expensive palette, and this is one that I didn't buy myself. It is a lot of money to spend on a palette, but if you have the money, I think it is really worth it. This is the Viseart Neutral Mattes 1 palette. I feel like Viseart doesn't get talked about as much as some other expensive brands. Like, you still hear about it, but it's not like Natasha Denona and Pat McGrath, which are just insanely expensive. They kind of have that market covered for shockingly expensive but very pretty palettes, whereas Viseart is kind of just below in terms of price, so I almost feel like it doesn't get talked about as much, but the quality is so good. I got sent this one in PR and I think I basically cried when I got it because I just never thought I'd get something like this, and the quality is just incredible. I feel like this is such an easy palette to use. It's got a really good range of basic matte shades and the shadows just kind of do the work for you, which, considering the price, that's what you want. If you are paying that much for eyeshadow, it shouldn't be hard work. If you don't have the money, it's not something that I'd run out and buy. You know, you can go without it. But I think especially if you are a professional makeup artist, these are just such high quality eyeshadows, and I think they are such a staple if you can afford them. For my most affordable option, I have the Technic Smokey eyeshadow palette. This one is currently $2.29 on Amazon, which is insanely cheap. It is cheaper on Amazon than it is on their website, but I have to confess, I haven't actually used it yet. I bought it because Make Me Up Misser kept talking about it and I really wanted a grey eyeshadow palette. I didn't really have one, but I think I got it in June, and that's when I kind of hit a bit of a downer because I'd had some bad news about work. So I bought it and haven't done anything with it. From what I've heard though, from seeing Make Me Up Misser use it, the quality looks really good for the price. So I'm sorry I can't give you any thoughts on it. I will try and make sure that I do a video about this at some point. Next up is my everyday palette, and this was kind of difficult because I haven't exactly been wearing makeup every day. For those of you who don't know, I was working on a makeup counter at the start of the year, so I wasn't really wearing a lot of eyeshadow. I was mostly wearing eyeliner just because it's a bit quicker in the morning. And then with lockdown number 1, I was furloughed and unfortunately I lost my job. Started working in an office, and at that point I was wearing makeup every day. And then after a month and a half, I was working from home. So apart from wearing makeup for YouTube and Instagram, everyday makeup has just not been a thing this year. But when I was going into the office, I would say that this one was my everyday palette. This is the W7 Queen Bee palette. I did get sent this one in PR, and I feel like I've had a lot of misses this year with W7. They've made some choices with their formulas that haven't worked for me, but I would say that this one is my favorite from them this year. I think I kind of had lower expectations because it is more nude. It's not kind of as exciting as some other dupes that they've released. For those of you who don't know, this is a dupe for the Urban Decay Naked Honey, but actually these are really good. I feel like they're really blendable. They have a good amount of pigmentation. The shimmers aren't amazing. They're not, you know, ultra metallic or anything, but they're also a formula that I can get on with. They're not a creamy formula that gives me loads of texture that's really hard to use. It's just a really good one for every day. You can get some really quick looks out of it, and it is really affordable. The only kind of downside for me is that because of the undertone of a lot of these shades, I haven't been wearing it lately because I'm not fake tanning at the moment, but when I fake tan, this is so good. Next up we have my most colourful palette, and I went for a bit of an OG. I went for the Morphe 35B. I mean, who did not have this palette at one point? I think around 2-3 years ago, before the James Charles palette came out, everyone had this. I think if you look back at my Instagram for last year, about half of the year I was using this in pretty much every single one of my looks. I don't really use it now anymore because the quality just isn't that good compared to what's come out since, but we had some good times. She's just a bit chalky and not that pigmented these days. Next up we have the smallest palette, and you would be forgiven for thinking that this is the smallest because it's pretty small, but no, we've got smaller. I have 2 of the Obsession mini palettes. I don't know if the collection had any sort of name. We have the Keep It Fresh palette and the Sunshine Makes Me Happy, and these are so small that I kind of got upset about it in my review. I reviewed this one and I was meant to film a video with this one, and I never did, and I think I was just too upset about how small they are. I think a lot of people assume that they are duping the Colourpop palette, so I think a lot of us were expecting them to be the same size, but I'm going to show them to you side by side. This is the Child palette from Colourpop. The eyeshadows are 1 gram each, and this is the Makeup Obsession one. You get 0.38 grams per eyeshadow in this, which is really small. I think that is the smallest eyeshadow in any of my palettes. They just didn't feel worth it for me. They were £5 and I feel like that was too expensive, but if you want to see all of my thoughts on it, the review will be linked down below, and I was pretty annoyed. I was not happy. On the other side of that we have the biggest palette, and I really expected it to be one of my Morphe palettes, but it turns out it is this guy, the Beauty Bay Bay and Mmmmitchell collaboration. This is no longer sold by Beauty Bay. I think they removed it when Mmmmitchell was starting to plan his own brand, and I do think it's a shame because this is one of my favorite palettes, and even though it doesn't look it, like it's a small square and it does look really compact, you get 32 shades and each one is 2.8 grams, and they are the biggest eyeshadow pans in my entire collection, and that makes it the biggest palette. I basically don't feel like I'm ever gonna finish this palette because the pans are so big. The only thing is that now whenever I get a palette by Beauty Bay, I open it up and I look at the pans and I'm like, oh my god, these are really, really small. And I realise that those are a normal size, it's just that this one, these are absolutely huge. Shame they discontinued it because it is a really good palette and there's just so much product, I'm never gonna run out. So next up is the palette with the best memory, and this was really, really, really hard because there were a few that I could have picked, but I am going to repeat myself. I'm gonna go for a palette we've already mentioned, and that is gonna be the Modern Renaissance palette again. And the reason for that is that this is the palette that I used on my friend when I did her makeup for her wedding last year. We all have that friend at school or at uni who ends up doing everyone else's makeup or hair, and that used to be me. My friends would come round to my house to get ready before a school disco and I would do their makeup. And I think for a time I did kind of consider going down the route of becoming a makeup artist, but for some reason I just didn't think it was for me. I didn't think it was something that I wanted. And then later on I went down the blog route and doing makeup on myself, but I still didn't think that doing makeup on others was for me. And that was until my friend asked me to do her makeup for her wedding, and all of a sudden things just kind of clicked and I realized that that is what I wanted to do in life. So after her wedding we left London and I went to get a job on a makeup counter. Unfortunately 2020 had some different ideas for me, and I'm not currently working in makeup, but I am, you know, working on going back into that industry. But that's why I'm choosing the Modern Renaissance for this, because, you know, I associate this palette with realizing that this was what I wanted to do in my life. So yeah, I know I've put it in there twice, but kind of made sense to me. Next up is a palette that is worth the hype. And I felt like this was hard to do. I mean, I could have put Modern Renaissance back in there, but I don't feel like I have that many palettes in my collection that were like ones that were really, really hyped up. So I ended up going with the Book of Magic palette, which is a really recent addition to my collection, but I kind of feel like when it got announced, people got really, really excited about it. It is a cool toned palette, and we've seen it a lot over the last few years, you know, that is what has been in, but it's one that's also really, really well done. To me, this is a palette that is really, really well thought out. Most of the mattes come with a dark, a medium, and a light, so I think that that is really good if you're a beginner, you know, someone who is going into their first cool toned palette, which can be a bit scary. I think it's really easy to use. I like the way that the shades are organized in the palette because, you know, there's this trend of really messy palettes these days and it is not for me, but this one I think is really, really user friendly and is £15, and for that price the quality really, really impressed me. This is a palette that I'm super, super happy to have purchased, and I really, really want to play with it more. And whenever I speak to anyone about this palette and they're on the fence about it, my reaction is literally, go for it. For £15, what have you got to lose? Next up is a palette that is not worth the hype, and I had to do a lot of thinking about this one because there were a few that I wanted to put in there. I have one in front of me and right now I'm still hesitating because I'm not sure if that is the one that I want to put in there. Oh god, this is really, really hard. Okay, I think I'm going to start with my honourable mentions first for this, and then I'm going to give you my final choice. I actually have two for one of my honourable mentions, or I guess dishonourable in this section. I have two palettes by Juvia's Place. I wanted these for ages. I kept seeing everyone else using Juvia's Place, especially American YouTubers, and I was like, I really want to try these. Everyone keeps banging on about how good they are, and I really haven't used them that much. I don't know, I just don't think the quality is that good. Maybe it is just these two palettes. I don't know, Juvia's Place is one of those brands that I hear everyone say how good it is, and when I finally got these, they weren't that good. My other dishonourable mention is going to be the Revolution Forever Flawless Chilled palette. I feel like a lot of people were excited about this because it was a weed themed palette, which I'm not that fussed about all of that, but I feel like people were really excited about this because it looked like it was going to be a good green palette. I used this for my review and that was it. I haven't touched it again since. If you want to see all my thoughts on it, it's probably best if you watch the review so I don't bang on about this one, but yeah, I feel like people were really excited about this and yeah, meh, basically. But for my actual palette that did not live up to the hype, I'm gonna go with the Anastasia Beverly Hills Original Norvina palette. This palette came out 2 years ago and people were really excited about it when it came out because it was at a time where cool tones were kind of returning. So when this got announced, a lot of us were really excited. One of the things that people did point out once they started receiving this palette is that it isn't that much of a cool toned palette. It looks like it's a purple palette and we only have 2 purple shades, and some of the other shades, they could be in any other warm palette. There's something about the quality that I just didn't really like. I think some of these shimmers are actually quite hard to use. I mean, this one, Celestial, looks like it should be an amazing shade and it never had the payoff I expected. I feel like Summer, Rose Gold and Dazzling kind of always ended up blending into the same colour. Thanks for that, who needs that? And I felt like the shimmers had no staying power. I would use them with a glitter glue underneath and it still wouldn't make a difference. I don't know, they were just really lackluster. They didn't work for me. The reason that I was super disappointed is that before then, I had always waited before buying an Anastasia palette. It took me ages to get Modern Renaissance. It took me ages to get Subculture because I was really worried about the feedback, but I decided that I liked the look of the colours enough that eventually I went for it. But when it came to this one, I pretty much bought it not quite immediately, but almost immediately after it was released, and I regretted it. I was really disappointed. I haven't bought an Anastasia palette since. Because I was disappointed, I then ended up waiting after the next one, which was the Riviera. I really wanted it, but I went, no, this time I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna see the reviews, and that's the year where Anastasia released, oh god, you know, 50 different things in 1 year, and you know, by then I couldn't be bothered, basically. So this is my palette that's not worth the hype because I haven't bought anything from Anastasia since then. Next up is the favorite palette from a favorite brand, and I feel like this is really hard because I don't have a favorite brand anymore. I think had you asked me a couple of years ago before this kind of really let me down, I would have said Anastasia Beverly Hills and I would have picked Modern Renaissance, but we don't need to have it in here a third time. So I kind of ended up going, right, well, which brands do I have more palettes from and actually have a favorite from them? And one of the brands that I do own a lot from at this point is W7. And the palette that I've gone for is the Outrageous Orange palette. I did a review of these last year and I was a bit uncertain about them. I don't know if this was my favorite at the time, but out of these 3 Vivid palettes, this is the one that I've used the most. You would think that you would always get these same looks out of this palette, but because we've got 6 mattes, there's enough variation that you can change it up every time. So actually you do have a lot of possibilities in this for a £9 eyeshadow palette. I was unsure about the shimmer formula at the time, and that's because they do have a bit of a transparency to them, and the way that I was using them wasn't working. Having used some of their more recent palettes where they've gone for a more creamy formula that I don't like, it's just made me enjoy this more. It was a close one here for me between this one and the Queen Bee, but because I've already got the Queen Bee as an everyday palette, I would pick this one as my favorite from W7. Again, this is one of those palettes that if people ask me, you know, should I get this? It's a yes every time, because I think this one is really nice and really fun, and the pigmentation is incredible. So finally we have my most used palette, and this one was actually really hard. Again, because I'm not really leaving the house all that much, I'm not wearing makeup every day, so there isn't one that I like reach for constantly. So I ended up picking 3 here. I ended up cheating. The first one that I'm going to mention here is going to be another repeat. It's going to be the Beauty Bay Me, Myself and Mmmmitchell. If you look back at my Instagram throughout the year, I would say that this is the one that comes back the most. It's something that I reach for if I need a particular shade that isn't in another palette, or I can use it to do a full look. So I feel that this is the one in the past year that has come up the most in terms of Instagram and YouTube. In terms of real life, I picked 2. I went with the Revolution Forever Flawless Allure and my Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde palette. These 2 are good when I do everyday makeup, but that's a bit more zhuzhed up. I was using this one a lot last year after reviewing it. I was using it for work in the run up for Christmas because it's a really nice warm tone palette. It's got some gorgeous shimmers, some gorgeous textures in there. I would just swipe on one of the metallic shades all over my lid, use a couple of the mattes in my crease, and it was just kind of really easy, quickly done, and then go. And then after Christmas, it kind of got replaced with the Huda Beauty Mercury Retrograde. This one is insanely expensive, and if you look closely, you can see see I've made a serious dip in some of the shimmers, which really upsets me because they are my favorite thing out of it. But again, it is one of those, you know, put on a glitter glue, put on one of the shimmer shades, a couple of crease shades, done, and you can go. If I was going for something, you know, a bit more wearable, a bit more toned down, it would be this, and that's why that's my everyday palette. But when I want a little bit of kind of quick glam, essentially, something where I don't have to think too much about it, it would be these two. And so before lockdown, before we all got stuck at home, these were the ones that I was using the most. So there we go, that is it for all of the questions. I do feel like I cheated a little bit by having some repeats in there and having more than one in some categories, but I do feel like the bigger your collection is, the more likely you are able to have one for each category, and I would say my collection is kind of medium, so I feel like, you know, at that size having repeats is it's okay. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this and what you would put as your answers to the questions. So as I said earlier in the video, if you want to drop them down in the comment section, I will put the questions in my description box so you can just really easily copy and paste it. If you enjoyed this video, then do as always, please give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss out on my next video, and I'll see you all on the next one. Bye guys!